Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Imagine standing in a bustling, sunlit city square.
Yeah, just picture it.
You are holding a microphone, surrounded by your community, and you are speaking just days after surviving a brutal, bloody military siege.
It is a wild scenario.
Right. The air is still thick with the smoke of the aftermath, but you are alive and your enemies are gone.
Which is such a visceral image.
It really is. And that is the true energy of the ancient text we are decoding today. Because usually when we look at classical poetry, we treat it like, a faded painting in a museum.
Right, we just sort of stand back and look at it.
Yeah, we study the aesthetics metaphors from a safe, comfortable distance. But today, we are stepping into an active historical theater and a victory parade rolled into one.
I mean, it is a high-stakes theological battlefield. We are examining words forged in the immediate chaotic aftermath of a survival scenario.
Yeah.
The language is practically still ringing with the sounds of conflict.
So today, our mission for this deep dive is to analyze excerpts from a commentary on the Holy Scriptures, Psalms by John Peter Lange et al., focusing specifically on Psalm 9.
And it is quite a text to unpack.
It is a massive intersection of Hebrew grammar, fiercely debated history, and unfiltered human emotion following a major victory.
Absolutely.
We are unpacking the linguistic nuances, the structural quirks, and the historical debates hidden within this commentary to show you how these ancient words carry massive historical and theological weight.
Which means we really need to start by establishing the setting.
Yes, the setting is everything here.
It is. When you have a text this charged with military and political language, nailing down the timeline changes everything about how you read it.
Well, let us jump into that. The timeline is pretty heavily contested among the commentators, right?
Oh, heavily contested. Laying out those debates gives us the necessary lens for the text. The commentary details several differing viewpoints regarding the authorship and the date of composition. For instance, some older scholars argued that this text belongs to the Maccabean era.
Wait, the Maccabean era?
Yeah, they tried to link it specifically to the death of Judas Maccabeus.
But if we place a text in the Maccabean era, we are talking about the 2nd century BC.
Right. Way down the timeline.
That is a highly turbulent political era, long after the Babylonian exile. It was during a period of Greek occupation and intense, gritty Jewish rebellion against leaders like Antiochus Epiphanes.
It was a time of guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, so I can see why a scholar might read a text about defeating enemies and map it onto that rebellion. But why do the modern linguists and other scholars in the commentary push back against that late date?
Well, the internal evidence contradicts that late date on multiple fronts.
Okay, how so?
So some interpreters tried to find a middle ground first, placing it earlier than the Maccabees, but still fairly late, specifically in the Assyrian era.
Like during Hezekiah's reign?
Yes, exactly that. They thought it referenced the days of King Hezekiah and the deliverance of Jerusalem from the massive siege of the Assyrian king Sennacherib.
Okay, that makes sense on paper.
It does, but the geographical and linguistic markers in the poetry create severe problems for both of those later dates.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, most of the interpreters highlighted in the commentary, such as Hitzig and Delitzsch, anchor the authorship firmly to David.
So we are going all the way back.
Right. They point either to his wars with the Ammonites and Syrians, or, as they conclude is most likely, to the wars with the Philistines shortly after David captured the fortress of Zion, which is referenced in 2 Samuel chapter 5.
Okay, so we have a massive chronological spread in these theories, stretching from David all the way down to the Maccabees.
It is a gap of roughly 800 years.
That is a huge gap. So what is the specific internal evidence that conclusively destroys those later theories?
It comes down to paying very close attention to the specific physical landmarks mentioned in the poetry.
Like what?
Well, the commentary notes that any post-exilic date, such as the period after the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, or a Maccabean date, fails because of verse 14.
What happens in verse 14?
In that verse, the author speaks of praising God in the gates of the daughter of Zion.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Because if the texts were written during the Babylonian exile, the author could not possibly be standing in the gates of Zion.
Precisely. The gates were burned to the ground.
The walls were rubble and the people were hundreds of miles away in Babylon.
Right. That physical impossibility just ruins the late date theories. Furthermore, verse 11 mentions Zion as the royal seat of Jehovah.
And that matters because...
That single detail rules out an overly early date, before David conquered the city of Jebus and renamed it Zion.
So the geography essentially forces the timeline.
It absolutely does.
If the physical gates are standing, and Zion is the established capital, you are locked into a highly specific window of history.
You are. And Hitzig brings in another layer of proof by examining the mechanics of the language itself.
What does he find there?
He points out that this text possesses the rough, broken language and terseness of expression characteristic of the earliest times of Hebrew psalmody.
Rough and broken, huh?
Yeah. This text utilizes an alphabetical arrangement, an acrostic, where the verses begin with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet.
Right, which we see in a few other places.
Ancient cultures used acrostics primarily as memory aids, creating a structured way to recall long passages before written texts were widely available to the public. However, the arrangement here is remarkably loose and incomplete.
I would guess that a loose structure implies an older text.
Why do you say that?
Well, because as literary traditions mature over centuries, the rules of poetry become strictly codified. Later authors become obsessed with perfect form.
That is the precise argument Hitzig makes. He argues that this looseness is proof of an older pre-Jeremiah origin.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, if a later author from the exilic or post-exilic period had written it, they would not have ventured to proceed so loosely. Later acrostics are highly rigid and perfectly structured.
But this one is not.
No, this text feels raw, composed before those strict poetic rules were entirely set in stone.
Wow, okay. The structural analysis brings us to a fascinating relationship discussed in the commentary. We're looking at Psalm 9 today, but it has a very strange connection to the text immediately following it, Psalm 10.
This is one of my favorite parts.
They share this incomplete alphabetical sequence. So do they form one single text?
This is a major point of analysis. The Septuagint and the Vulgate, the ancient Greek and Latin translations of the Hebrew scriptures, combine them into one single long text.
Wait, really? They just mash them together?
Yep, they do. And some modern scholars agree, arguing that they were originally one connected alphabetical poem later broken apart and revised.
How does that work with the acrostic?
The acrostic begins in Psalm 9 and then partially carries over into Psalm 10, picking up the missing letters.
Oh, that is wild.
But Hitzig and Delitzsch argue against merging them completely. They view them as two coordinate halves of a higher unity.
Think of it like a two-part movie franchise for a modern audience.
I like that analogy.
The first movie, which we're looking at today, is a triumphant celebration of a major victory. It is loud, victorious, and full of sweeping resolutions.
Yeah, very much so.
But then the sequel plunges into a gritty, suspenseful struggle where the hero is crying out for help.
Right.
They share the same cinematic universe, they utilize the same stylistic DNA, and they even share the same underlying structure. But they function as two highly distinct emotional experiences.
That is a great way to frame it.
So how does this dual structure impact how you, as the reader, should read the text?
It requires you to hold two opposing realities in tension. The commentator Hupfeld points out that such a massive shift in tone is common in ancient texts.
Really? It is not just a weird quirk.
No, not at all. The first half provides the theological grounding. God has judged the wicked and saved the righteous in the past. That historical reality is established as absolute fact.
Okay, so you build the foundation first.
Exactly. Then the second half acts as the present-day crisis. The righteous are currently suffering and need that same God to act again.
So they feed into each other.
By recognizing them as two coordinate halves of a higher unity, you see that the soaring triumph of the first part is necessary to sustain the bitter lament of the second part.
The historical victory validates the subsequent cry for help.
You got it.
Well, establishing that timeline and understanding that this is the triumphant first half of a larger emotional experience naturally transitions our focus to the actual language the author uses to express his gratitude.
Let us look at those opening verses.
Yeah, in the opening verses, we see the author laying down the ground rules for how to react to a massive historical rescue.
Yeah.
What are the linguistic choices there?
The very first verse insists on a specific type of praise. It says, "I will praise thee, O Lord, with my whole heart."
With my whole heart.
Right. Hupfeld notes that this means praising not with the mouth, but sincerely with all the powers of the soul.
It is not just lip service.
No, it implies a zealous, undivided trust. Every bit of honor is given to God, and the credit for the victory is not split between human military strategy and divine grace.
Wow, so no sharing the glory.
None at all. Then, in verse 3, we hit a fascinating grammatical detail.
I love the grammar stuff. Lay it on me.
So, the text reads, "When mine enemies are turned back." The ancient versions treat the Hebrew preposition bet here as an indicator of time, translating it as when.
That makes it a simple statement of chronology, like, when this happened, I rejoiced.
That is how it is often read. But the commentary highlights a different approach. Commentators like Ewald and Hupfeld translate that preposition bet as indicating both time, AD, reason.
Oh, wow. Time and reason.
Yeah, so it should be read as, because mine enemies are turned backward.
So the retreat of the enemies is the direct ground or reason for the joy in the phrase.
Yes, it tightens the causal link. The author is not marking an arbitrary point in time, he is identifying the specific mechanism of his joy.
That is intense.
Yeah.
A causal link makes the emotion much more grounded in reality. It is a direct reaction to a concrete event.
It really does.
This brings up something you mentioned in your notes about a grammatical shift happening in the following verses. This shift reveals something massive about how the author views history and divine action.
Oh, this is such a good part. If we look at verses 4 through 6, there is a critical grammatical shift regarding the tenses of the verbs.
Okay, let us talk about the verbs.
In English, we have past, present, and future tenses. In Hebrew, you have perfect tenses, which indicate completed action, and imperfect tenses, which indicate incomplete or ongoing action.
Right.
In these verses, the text uses perfect tenses for God's actions.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Thou hast maintained my right. Thou satest in the throne judging. Thou hast rebuked the heathen. Thou hast destroyed the wicked.
So completed actions. Why is the use of the perfect tense here such a theological game changer for the reader?
Because it shows that the divine judgment is not a future expectation.
It is already done.
Exactly. DeWitt and some older interpreters viewed this as a messianic prophecy, looking forward to a final judgment at the end of the world, an eschatological event.
But the grammar pushes back on that.
Yes. Hupfeld and others point out that the perfect tenses contrast sharply with the imperfect tenses used later in verse 7 and 8.
Oh, I see.
The author is declaring that God has already taken his seat on the throne of judgment and has already executed a historical judicial act.
So the victory over the Philistines or Ammonites was not a military win. It was a completed, localized act of divine judgment.
Precisely. God has acted in the past, which provides the bedrock for trusting him in the future.
That shifts the whole perspective. The commentary also addresses a very difficult translation issue in verse 6, though.
Yes, it does.
The phrasing in older English translations can be incredibly confusing and almost contradictory.
It is an exceedingly difficult passage. Older translations render it as, O thou enemy, destructions are come to a perpetual end, and thou hast destroyed cities.
See, that phrasing makes it sound like the human enemy is the one who destroyed the cities.
Right, or that the author is addressing the enemy directly. The commentary clarifies that the word enemy is a collective noun. The thou in thou hast destroyed cities does not refer to the enemy at all.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it refers back to Jehovah from the previous verses.
Oh, wow.
God is the one who has rooted out the cities of the wicked. Their memory is lost entirely due to the divine judgment.
Okay, I have to stop and push back on this.
Sure, go for it.
If you're reading this today, that level of total destruction feels jarring. We are talking about blotting out names, rooting out cities, and erasing their memorial from history completely.
It is intense language.
It is. How does the commentary reconcile this absolute historical eradication with the concept of a just ruling authority? It sounds terrifying.
It is terrifying, and the text does not shy away from that reality. To reconcile it, we have to look at the contrast the commentary draws.
Okay, lay it out for us.
I will bring up Isaiah 29, verse 13, which Hupfeld uses as a contrast to the whole heart mentioned in verse 1.
What does Isaiah say?
Isaiah describes a people who draw near to God with their mouth and honor him with their lips, but their heart is far from him.
Which is just lip service.
Exactly. The commentary demands an honest heart. The absolute destruction of the wicked, those who offer no honest heart, who operate in violence and oppression, is the precise mechanism that creates a safe haven for the oppressed.
Oh, I get it now. So the eradication of the oppressor is the necessary prerequisite for the safety of the vulnerable.
Right.
You cannot have a stronghold for the downtrodden if the cities of the wicked are allowed to remain and continue their oppression. The violence of the rescue matches the violence of the oppression.
That is the theological logic of the text, and that logic bridges us directly into how the text describes the results of this judgment.
Because once the wicked are removed, something has to be built in their place.
Exactly. Which brings us to the vocabulary of safety and justice in verses 7 through 12.
Let us look at the specific words the author chooses there. The spatial metaphors are brilliant.
They really are. The commentary focuses heavily on the specific vocabulary used here. In verse 9, the text says, "The Lord also will be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble."
So what does the Hebrew actually say there?
The word translated as stronghold or refuge literally translates to height.
Right, like a mountain.
Yeah, it signifies a physical place of refuge to which someone has been snatched away from their enemies. It is a high place, out of reach of the arrows and swords below.
That is such a vivid picture. And the words for the sufferers are equally visceral, right?
Oh, completely. The contrast is built into the words for the sufferers. The word translated as oppressed literally means downtrodden or pounded.
Pounded.
It evokes the image of someone crushed into the dirt. And the word for trouble literally means to be cut off.
Like isolated.
It implies either being excluded by a solid bar or being confined and trapped in distress.
Wow. So you go from the intense claustrophobia of being confined by a bar pounded into the dirt to the expansive freedom of a height.
It is a massive shift.
It is a spatial shift from being trapped in a dark, narrow valley to standing on a mountain peak where you can breathe and see the horizon. That spatial shift is something anyone can feel in their bones.
It really grounds the poetry.
But then the text introduces a very specific title for God in verse 12 to explain how that rescue happens, and it brings in a fascinating piece of ancient cultural law.
This is one of the most significant cultural connections in the commentary.
I cannot wait to get into this one.
So verse 12 says, "When he maketh inquisition for blood, he forgetteth not the cry of the humble."
Okay.
Hupfeld analyzes the Hebrew phrase here, which translates to avenger of blood. The Hebrew word is goal.
Goal. Okay, explain that context for us.
We have to understand ancient Near Eastern justice to grasp this. In ancient nomadic tribes, there was no centralized police force or state prosecutor.
Right, no 911 to call.
Exactly. Justice was a family matter. According to custom, the goal was the nearest living relative of a murdered man. If your family member was killed, it was your absolute legal and societal duty to act as the goal, to hunt down a murderer and execute justice.
It's not optional.
Not at all. It was an unbreakable family obligation to restore the balance.
So this highly specific, highly localized cultural law regarding family vengeance is applied to God as a title.
Yes.
The creator of the universe is stepping into the legal role of a local family member.
God is named as the goal, and the commentary points out that the word blood here is used synecdochically.
Break that down for us.
A synecdoche is a figure of speech where a part represents the whole. Bloodshed is the extreme form of violence, but here it represents any injury, harm, hurt, or wickedness. God is the avenger of evil in general.
So how does that goal concept scale from a local family dispute to a massive principle of global justice? What does it change about how the reader views God's actions?
Well, by taking on the title of Go, the commentary suggests that God elevates a societal law into a cosmic principle. God assumes the role of the closest family member to the oppressed, the downtrodden, and the pounded. He takes their suffering personally.
That is a massive comfort, honestly.
It is. When the vulnerable are crushed, God steps into the legal and cultural role of their next of kin. He does not view their oppression from a distance as a neutral, dispassionate judge. He views it with the obligation and righteous anger of a brother or a father demanding justice for his own blood.
Man, that completely reframes the earlier verses about the destruction of the wicked cities.
It really does, right?
Yeah, because it is not arbitrary divine rage. It is the calculated, obligated justice of the Goel protecting his family.
Exactly.
If God is operating as this avenger of blood up on the mountaintop, it completely reframes how we view the valley below. And the text actually sets up a stark contrast between two very different destinations in the next section.
We have a tale of two gates in verses 13 and 14.
Right, so what are these two gates?
The author prays for mercy, asking God to consider the trouble he suffers, and addresses God as the one that lifteth me up from the gates of death, that I may show forth all thy praise in the gates of the daughter of Zion.
So the gates of death and the gates of Zion. Let us start with the first one.
The commentary unpacks the first set, the gates of death. In Hebrew, this is Sheol.
Okay. The underworld.
Yeah, Sheol is poetically treated here as a literal prison with strong, inescapable bars.
There is that confinement imagery again.
Exactly. Hupfeld even references Homer's description of the gates of Hades to show how widespread this imagery was in the ancient world.
Oh, that is wild, pulling Homer into
It
this.
just shows the shared cultural understanding. It is the absolute place of confinement from which no human strength can break free.
Then, in stark contrast, you have the gates of the daughter of Zion. Now, when people hear daughter of Zion, they might immediately think of a specific historical woman, or maybe a purely spiritual, heavenly afterlife concept. How does a commentary define it?
The commentary is careful to define what this means. John Calvin and others note the sharp contrast. The gates of Zion represent a place of public gathering, vibrant life, and the handling of high affairs.
High affairs, like politics.
Yeah, in the ancient world, the city gates were the center of civic life. It was where the elders sat, where court cases were heard, and where public announcements were made.
So it is the opposite of isolation.
Exactly. Furthermore, the commentary explicitly states that this is not the heavenly Jerusalem populated with the praises of the blessed dead.
It is not heaven.
No, it is the earthly Jerusalem, or more accurately, its living inhabitants.
Okay, so where does daughter come from?
In ancient literature, cities and their populations were frequently personified as females, sometimes as virgins, sometimes as mothers. Their inhabitants were referred to as daughters. It highlights the intimate, filial relationship between the people and God.
So the author is asking to be saved from the silent, isolated prison of death so that he can stand in the most public, vibrant, noisy center of the living earthly community and declare what God has done.
That is the goal.
It is the difference between being locked in a soundproof subterranean vault where absolutely no one can hear you scream versus standing in the middle of a bustling, sunlit city square holding a microphone.
I love that image.
The text is moving the speaker from terrifying isolation to public vindication.
That analogy captures the transition perfectly. And the commentary notes that while the righteous are brought up from the gates of death into the public square of Zion, the wicked experience the opposite trajectory.
They pass each other like two elevators.
Yes. The righteous go up, the wicked go down. The text outlines the mechanics of how the wicked are brought down in verses 15 through 20.
The mechanics of justice are fascinating here. The text describes what I would call the boomerang of justice.
The boomerang of justice, I like that.
Let us look at verse 15. The text says, "The heathen are sunk down in the pit that they made. In the net which they hid is their own foot taken."
It is a classic poetic turnaround.
Right. The trap they set for the righteous snaps shut on their own ankles.
Mm.
But you noted a massive debate among the commentators about the tense of the verb sunk down or were plunged.
Yes, we encounter the perfect tense here again. John Calvin, DeWitt, and Hengstenberg argue that this is a prophetic perfect.
A prophetic perfect, meaning the author is so absolutely confident that God will act in the future, he writes about it as if it has already happened.
That is the argument for the prophetic perfect. It is a statement of confidence in future action.
Okay, but do everyone agree with that?
No, Hupfeld and Delitzsch push back on that interpretation. They argue that if you read it as a future prophecy, you lose the contrast with the imperfect ongoing tenses of the surrounding section.
No, you break the pattern.
Exactly. They argue it either expresses a general clause of experience, this is how God always operates, or it refers back to the very recent historical past, the actual military victory that prompted the song in the first place.
That brings it right back to the physical battlefield.
Yes.
Well, this debate about tenses leads us to verse 17, which contains a heavy theological declaration. The text says, "The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God." That word turned has a lot of linguistic weight behind it, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. The word translated as turned or return is the Hebrew word shav. Hitzig and Hupfeld have a significant debate over this single word.
Over one word.
Just this one word. Hupfeld suggests it just means again, implying they lose the life they had and go back to being dust.
Like from dust you came to dust you return.
Exactly. But Hitzig argues strongly against watering down the language. He states that it does not mean becoming dust again. It signifies returning to their true home.
Returning to their true home. Wow. That is a chilling perspective. It implies that their actions on Earth have already determined their citizenship.
The commentary notes the dreadful nature of this perspective. It is not about their physical descent or their historical origin.
No.
No. Sheol, the lower world, is named as the place to which their earthly actions have shown they truly belong.
They earned it, essentially.
Right. The state of their heart on earth dictates their final, permanent residence. They are sent back to the lower world as to their native country.
That sets the stage for the final verses of this section. In verses 19 and 20, the author prays for God to arise and let not man prevail. He asks God to put them in fear so the nations may know themselves to be but men.
Yes, and the commentary dives deep into the specific Hebrew vocabulary used here for man and fear.
I think this is where the text gets incredibly vivid.
It really does. The word used for man here is enosh. The commentary notes that this is not a collective noun for humanity.
Oh, it's not just like saying mankind.
No, rather, it is a word that specifically emphasizes frailty as the defining characteristic of man when compared with God.
Frailty.
Yes, it highlights human weakness, mortality, and susceptibility to disease and death.
So they are not mighty warriors, they're just enosh.
Exactly. And then we hit the word for fear, mora. This word triggers wild translation debates among the scholars.
See, fear seems like a straightforward concept, but knowing this commentary, I am guessing the Hebrew word here has some highly specific, weird translation history.
You would be completely correct. Most ancient translators, like the Chaldean and Aquila, regard it as a variation of a word meaning terrors. God puts terrors upon them.
That makes sense.
The Septuagint and the Vulgate, however, change the vowel pointing slightly and translate it as lawgiver or teacher, meaning God sets a lawgiver over them to instruct them.
Okay, a bit different, but still logical.
But then you have scholars like A. Schultens and J.H. Michaelis. They connect the word to its usage in Judges chapter 13, where it translates to a razor.
A razor, like for shaving a beard?
Yes, a razor?
I have to stop here. It feels like we went from cosmic justice and the gates of the underworld down to a visit to the local barber.
I know, it sounds ridiculous at first.
How does the ancient cultural shame of a shaved beard translate into the broader theological point about human frailty and divine humbling?
It does seem completely absurd and abrupt to modern ears, but we have to understand the cultural weight.
Okay, educate us on ancient beards.
In the ancient Near East, a man's beard was the primary symbol of his dignity, his maturity, and his freedom. You can see this elsewhere in Scripture, like in 2 Samuel chapter 10, where the king of Ammon shaves off half the beards of David's ambassadors, and it is treated as an act of war.
Wow, an act of war over a beard.
To have your beard forcibly shaved by an enemy was an act of massive humiliation. It stripped away your status and reduced you to the level of a subjugated captive or a slave.
So it is not just a bad haircut. It is a public stripping of identity and power.
Exactly. The scholars who support this translation argue that all these metaphors, sinking into pits, returning to Sheol, having the beard shaved with a razor, serve the exact same purpose.
Those Jews.
They are meant to violently strip away human arrogance. The heathen nations view themselves as invincible gods on earth. The divine judgment acts as a razor, stripping away their false dignity and exposing them as enosh, frail, weak, temporary men.
That is a phenomenal connection. That transition from false gods to frail men sets up the theological and homiletical takeaways perfectly.
It is the perfect pivot.
The commentary moves from this granular word-by-word analysis into the broader doctrinal points that pastors and theologians have drawn from the text over the centuries.
Yes, Lange's commentary always brings it back to the pulpit.
So when we step back and look at the whole picture, what are the major theological conclusions Lange's commentary distills from this text?
The primary doctrinal point the commentary makes is about the scope of God's judgment and salvation. It notes that God does not postpone judgment solely until the end of the world.
Meaning he acts now.
Right. He already judges individuals and nations in present history, blotting out traces of the wicked, while simultaneously saving those who take refuge with him.
It is an active, ongoing historical process. We're not just sitting in an eschatological waiting room, waiting for the end of time for justice to occur. We see justice breaking into history now.
Precisely. And interestingly, the commentary points out what is missing from the text as well.
What is missing?
It states that there is no direct, explicit declaration here of the resurrection to eternal life.
Wait, really? With all the intense talk of Sheol and the gates of death, there is no direct promise of a heavenly resurrection.
Not explicitly.
How does a Christian commentary handle that omission?
The foundations for that belief are laid, but it is hinted at negatively.
Hinted at negatively.
Yeah, the text emphasizes the absolute frailty of man, his nature from birth, and contrasts it with the eternal nature of God. The dreadful perspective opened up for the wicked implies a continued state of ruin, while the righteous are raised up to present their life in the church.
Okay, I see.
It is a theology of present rescue that hints at future eternal realities without fully spelling them out. The deliverance from the earthly gates of death becomes the type and shadow of the final deliverance.
That is a highly nuanced way to read it. The commentary also includes voices from its homiletical section, quotes from famous preachers and theologians who applied this text to their congregations.
Yes, the practical application side.
There is a fantastic quote from Charles Spurgeon regarding verse 2, where the author says, "I will be glad and rejoice in thee." How does Spurgeon view this command to rejoice?
Spurgeon's commentary is incredibly vivid. He argues that holy mirth and sanctified gladness are the only appropriate responses to God's goodness.
Holy mirth, I like that phrase.
He contrasts this joy with the worship of false gods. He notes that birds extol the Creator with joyous songs and fish leap up in worship with delight.
The natural world praising God.
Right. But then he contrasts that natural joy with human idolatry. He says that the ancient pagan god Moloch might be worshipped with shrieks of pain from human sacrifices, and the Hindu idol Juggernaut might be honored by the dying groans of people crushed under its wheels, but the God of the text is best pleased with the holy mirth of his people.
Wow.
Joy is a theological requirement, a stark contrast to the terror demanded by false idols.
That is a staggering contrast. Then you have Matthew Henry, who breaks down how a person actually achieves that level of trust and joy. Because it is not just blind optimism, is it?
Not at all. Matthew Henry points out that trust is entirely dependent on knowledge. The better God is known, the more he is trusted.
So it is intellectual as well as emotional.
Exactly. He breaks it down by specific attributes. If you know God to be a God of infinite wisdom, you will trust him farther than you can currently see him.
Right.
If you know him to be a God of almighty might, you will trust him even when all human and creature confidences fail. And if you know him as a God of infinite grace, you will trust him even in the face of death.
The historical track record established in the first half of the text provides the data needed to trust the attributes of God in the second half.
Yes, it is all connected.
And then there's Taub. I love the imagery he uses to describe the relationship between thankfulness and prayer. It brings the two halves of the psalm together perfectly. How does he describe it?
Taub states that thankfulness and prayer are the two parts between which the entire militant Church of God moves. He describes them as two levers going up and down, driving the heart of every Christian who fights the good fight.
Two levers. That is brilliant. Picture a massive two-piston engine. One piston is thankfulness for what has already been done in the past.
Right.
The other piston is prayer, crying out for what is desperately needed in the present and the future. If either piston stops firing, the entire engine of the church stalls out completely.
That is a great visual.
You cannot just live in past gratitude without present reliance, and you cannot constantly demand present rescue without acknowledging past victories. The machinery requires both levers to operate.
That dual reliance is the framework for the entire text. It requires a memory of the past and a voice for the present.
And that framework is perfect for wrapping up our understanding of this entire deep dive. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started on the historical battlegrounds of David's wars with the Philistines, looking at how a military victory birthed the specific poetry.
We waded through the grammatical shifts, seeing how perfect tenses prove that divine judgment is a completed historical reality, not just a future hope.
We examined the spatial contrasts, the claustrophobia being pounded into the valley versus the expansive safety of the mountain height.
We compared the inescapable bars of the gates of death with the vibrant, noisy public square of the gates of Zion.
And we saw how God takes on the cultural title of the Goel, stepping in as the closest family member, the avenger of blood, to execute justice for the oppressed, utilizing the boomerang of justice to trap the wicked in their own nets while running a razor over human arrogance to reveal the frail Enosh beneath.
It is a text that forces the reader to confront the reality of historical justice and the necessity of both gratitude and desperate prayer.
It really is. We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, based on a quote from Plumer found in the source text. When looking at the sheer scale of the historical rescue and the cosmic justice we discussed today, Plumer notes that an occasional passing thank you is an entirely mismatched response to a perpetual stream of rich benefits.
It is just not enough.
Consider the scale of the provisions and the protection discussed today. If those provisions are indeed a continuous flowing stream, then throwing an occasional word of thanks into the air falls incredibly short.
Right.
How does your daily routine actually reflect the reality of a continuous stream of provisions? Does the engine of your daily life utilize both pistons, the constant gratitude for the past and the active prayer for the present?
It is a heavy question.
When we started, we talked about how we prefer ancient texts to be like faded paintings, safe, distant, and abstract. But when you look closely at the mechanics of this text, you do not see a blurry metaphor. You see the sharp, jagged, undeniable lines of a real battlefield where real justice was executed, demanding a real, wholehearted response today.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep examining the evidence, and keep analyzing the texts that shape history.